What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, August 20th, 2018, start of a brand new week. We have a lot of stuff to talk about, and the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. This week, we're going to have two guests on the show. On Wednesday, our third-hour guest is going to be Layla from Ontario. She's become a frequent caller to the show, and I've gotten a lot of email from people very impressed with her command of history. So we're just going to let her have the whole hour to ramble on and educate us all. And then Thursday, we're going to have Don Wiskin of Extendivite will be joining us in hour number 3. And before I started into the news, I just saw something on Fox News where they're doing a story about the 40th anniversary of the Vikings, the lander touching down on Mars. It was 40 years ago today, August 20. Actually, it was July 20th when the lander set down. The second lander touched down in the first week of August. But I don't know where this story came from. I've actually seen it repeated in a couple of different places, and I'm saying, doesn't anybody check their facts anymore? I mean, there was this big stink. The White House wanted that first lander to land on the nation's bicentennial, July 4th. And they couldn't find a suitable landing space. And so the White House said, we'll put it down on July 20th, which is also the anniversary of Apollo 11's touchdown on the moon. So that's what we wound up doing. So sorry, Fox News, you didn't get that one right. Let's get into the news here. There's a lot going on around the world here. And we're coming up on the situation in Afghanistan where we're going to have active servicemen and servicewomen who had not even been born yet when the war they're fighting began. Now, they keep referring to Afghanistan as the longest war in U.S. history. And it may well be the longest continuous combat in U.S. history. It's not our longest war. The Korean War is. Technically, it's still underway after more than 60 years. So, no doubt they're going to be out there saying we're making progress against the Taliban. And they aren't, not really. Over in the Pashtun region, the mountain tribes have literally battled the full might of the U.S. empire to a stalemate. And it's cost you, the American taxpayers, $4 trillion with a T, 2,371 dead, 20,320 wounded soldiers, and nobody knows how many Afghans have died. That number is being kept secret. Now, Bolton, as you know, is basically traveling around. He's talking to foreign governments. He went to Israel. And I saw this photo of Bolton with Netanyahu. And Netanyahu was just grinning ear to ear. He's getting what he wants. He looks like the cat who ate the canary and the cage. So while he was in Israel, Bolton started cranking up the anti-Iran rhetoric again. And basically, again, how to push back against Iranian aggression in the region, because gosh darn it, that's the job of the United States, and to promise that they will never have nuclear weapons. So they're back pounding on that one. The nuclear deal was working. The nuclear deal was working. And I love the way that Bolton is traveling around talking about Iran's aggression and North Korea's aggression and all that. With the United States being the most aggressive nation in recent memory. When you look at all these wars that are out there and you're always told there's a really good reason. There's a really good reason for us to go on into these other countries and bomb them into rubble and kill off a bunch of their people. There's always a really good reason, which always turns out, of course, to be a complete fiction. Now, getting on down to Syria, attacks are intensifying on the U.S. forces and their allied militias in northeastern Syria. And this is taking place in Raqqa province. On Saturday, a bomb went off at a gathering of SDF gunmen near the villages of Al-Madouli in western Raqqa, killing and wounding several militias. And there's no official account on possible casualties, but it's very intense. The Syrian people want the United States to leave. And of course, the United States attitude is, well, we're going to stay. We have to stay in case ISIS comes back. Forgetting that Syria and Russia basically took care of the ISIS problem. But the United States wants to garrison Syria now to keep them from getting uppity ideas about being more independent than they already are here. And the U.S. Army is dispatching more military hardware to northeastern Syria. And, pardon me, basically this is going to Hasaka and Aleppo to develop its bases, which I would like to remind everybody exist without the permission of the Syrian government. So apparently 70 trucks of the U.S. Army carrying military vehicles, equipment, and construction materials have arrived in Syria in the last 24 hours. It is very, very clear the United States has no intention of leaving, even though they have no real legitimate reason to be there. ISIS and Al-Qaeda are pretty much all but gone. Idlib will be the end of this war. The Syrian government doesn't want the United States there. The Syrian people don't want the United States there. So, all right, now, the Turkish army and their allied militants have set up new bases in northern Syria around the area near Afrin, where basically Turkey pushed into Syria a while back and surrounded the area of Afrin and said, we're just here temporarily to deal with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but like the United States, they don't seem in a rush to leave. Over in Turkey, apparently somebody took some shots at the U.S. Embassy. There was this white van driving by. They don't know who did it. They're obviously trying to find out. But 3 bullets hit a security booth outside the U.S. Embassy in Turkey earlier today. Nobody was hurt. So looks like somebody in Turkey doesn't like the United States being around here. We're getting to be very unpopular around the world. We're not well liked. Okay, down in Iraq, Colonel Sean Ryan, who's the spokesman for the Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve, is saying that U.S. troops will stay in Iraq as long as needed. Because ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they may re-energize, they may come on back here. No, what's really going on is the Iraqi government is straining at the leash. They want to go their own way. They want to run Iraq for the benefit of the Iraqi people. They're talking about closer ties with China and Russia, and so the United States needs to garrison Iraq to hold that government in line. So that diplomats can point out the window at all that military hardware and say, don't you do anything we don't like. Bad things will happen to you. I think that the U.S. military is very much overstretched around the globe. If Bernie Sanders is right, we've got military operations going on in something like 76 different countries, most of which we don't know. Remember, it caught everybody when those 4 Americans got killed in Niger, and everybody was saying, what the heck are we doing in there? Now, down in South Africa, the first white farms have been ordered seized this week by the African National Congress. And these 2 farms are in the Limpopo province in South Africa, and they're going to be seized without any court process. And 2 more orders for final appropriation of other farms have been signed. This is the first wave of the promised land seizures in the country. And if you look at how well it worked out over in Zimbabwe, you can see that South Africa is heading into trouble. Now, South Africa did try and avoid the bad optics on simply grabbing the farms without compensation. They did actually make offers to purchase the farms for about 10% of their real worth. And the owners of the farms said, no deal, and they're hoping that they can go through the court system and challenge this order. But I don't think they're really going to have much of a success. And don't think it can't happen here, because apparently Senator Elizabeth Warren is pushing for a bill for the government to take control of all large businesses here in the United States. That would be the largest theft of private property in all of human history. And after all, it worked out so well in Venezuela, why shouldn't we try it here? Now, down in Palestine, they've had a little tiny, itsy-bitsy problem with the postal system. And Palestinians living in the West Bank have just received a delivery of some 10 tons of letters and postal packages that the Tel Aviv regime had kept for the last 8 years. And my guess is probably they just got tired of storing it all and said, all right, send it all over there. But they're finally getting their letters and packages. Now, speaking of Palestine, the United Nations General Assembly has requested a report as to just what's going on over between Israel and Gaza. And the UN chief is out there proposing that the UN deploy armed forces to protect Palestinians. Now, if that has to go through the Security Council, of course, the United States is going to veto that. And that will make the United States look complicit in the continuing slaughter of the Palestinian people by Israel. And yes, more Palestinians were killed during last Friday's protests along the fence with Israel. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Don in the Philippines, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, you're talking about we're going to stay in Iraq forever. I was in the Missouri National Guard when George W. Bush first had this invasion of Iraq, and I remember this. At that time, they were saying, "Well, they're going to greet us with flowers. We'll be out of there in 6 months."
Yeah.
That was the word, right? And this guy, I remember at the time, the general, the top dog there in the Missouri National Guard, he made it a point to drive around as the state and visit every unit, every armory in the whole state, and just talk to the guys. He was just a down-to-earth individual, basically. This was before the National Guard was transformed into a war machine. Back in those before that invasion, basically the Guard was the place that was the last-ditch effort. You weren't going to be, couldn't not expect to be mobilized all the time. And after that, anyway, this guy went around there, and I remember what he said, because at the time somebody asked me, how long are we going to be there? And he said, we'll be there forever. This was back in 2001.
Yep.
So this guy knew what the deal was. I just wondered, what do you think about I've always felt that Al Gore, for all his faults and everything, he was not a great man. I think things would have been a lot better if he would have won the election, which he probably actually did if they wouldn't have screwed him over there in Florida. But what do you think would have happened if Gore would have been elected?
I think that, like Donald Trump, he would have been co-opted and controlled and leashed, and the war agenda would have continued anyway, because we keep voting for candidates who promise an end to war and lower taxes. We never get it. That's just the plain, hard reality. We never get it. And Al Gore certainly would have been in a position to push his global warming nonsense on us all, but I don't think he would have changed the course of America's military adventurism one tiny bit, because, I mean, this is going all the way back to 9/11, when they, and even before that, with the project for the New American Century, where they were talking about literally a century of unending war by the United States against the rest of the world.
Yeah, the think tanks already had it lined up, I guess, but I don't know if 9/11 would have even happened with Gore. That's what I'm thinking, because the Iraq invasion was predicated by the 9/11, whatever happened there. So, of course, we'll never know. This is a what-if question of history that nobody will ever find out. But anyway, Mike, I'll let you go. I'll listen off the air then.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot here. And I think quite possibly 9/11 would have happened had there been a President Gore, because the people who were behind it were basically calling the shots, and they kept President Bush obviously informed about it. But we've seen with the Trump presidency that deep state is unfortunately unstoppable. The only thing that is going to stop these U.S. wars against the rest of the world is the collapse of the U.S. federal government and economy. That's right now, that's the only hope for the world. Okay, getting on back here to the news. Over in the Koreas, they've opened up the border to South Koreans to basically reunite with relatives they have not seen since the Korean War. And these are very elderly people. And it's a temporary reunion. They're going to go back and live in South Korea. But it's another indication that the Koreas are moving toward reunification. And the United States is not going to want to let that happen. But it looks to me like Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un have decided this is really what's best for the peninsula. And if they reunify, if they declare an official end to the Korean War, then North Korea doesn't need nuclear weapons. And that may be why Kim Jong-un has been talking about getting rid of them. He's going to basically remove the U.S. motive for wanting to go back in there. Now, Lockheed Martin has come under some criticism because they provided many of the weapons being used in some of these horrible atrocities committed in the Middle East, in particular in Yemen with that school bus, and in a hilariously mistimed attempt at a public relations campaign to polish their image. They put out a call over Twitter for people to send in, images of their weapons, just looking good out there in the field. And I think they were trying to appeal to those members of the military who use their product to just take a picture of this sparkling weapon sitting there on the runway or on the truck and make it look really good. And instead, Lockheed Martin got flooded with bloody images of blown up people killed by their weapons. And I don't know who signed off on this idea, but it was lousy timing. It really was. All right. Oh, it's Layla in Ontario. Aloha, Layla. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I was determined I wouldn't call in today, but with all due respect to your earlier caller who said, gee, things might have been different, what do you think if it had been Al Gore? Well, Al Gore's daughter is married into the Rothschild family. And, of course, we know his obsession with convincing the world that we're all going to burn to death if we don't give up all our freedoms and let them tell us how to use anything that generates electricity or heat or carbon or whatever. And let's not forget, Chelsea Clinton is married to a nephew of George Soros.
Yes.
That's how the globalists do things. They start out with calling themselves Zionist Jews and claim it's religion, why they're taking over a small piece of land, a little piece of dirt. Why would anybody care about this place? And then they vacuum the money out from the entire world and build this magnet. Every time I hear a Jew tell me how beautiful it is in Israel, I think, yeah, well, really, with all the money they've stolen, of course they could build anything. The naivete, I mean, I don't mean to be disrespectful, truly, but I'm kind of amazed. And talk about naivete, my own naivete amazes me. You were so right about the DNA crap, the DNA stuff that is being sold as
yes.
being reliable. It was perhaps initially until they got what they want. I've just discovered that MyHeritage, which is a company based in Israel, has bought up all the companies that do genetic analysis and DNA analysis. So we're basically already taken over.
Yeah, we are. Now, Layla, Layla, got to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line. I'm going to put you on hold. We'll come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And before we go back to the phones here, once again, standing here with my hands out, Republic Broadcasting Network needs you. We need your support. We're in a time of literally open warfare between the corporate media and the independent media over who is going to tell you what to think. because that's what corporate media's job is, to tell you what to think, to what to care about, which presidential candidate that you should support. Boy, they tried that hard in 2016, and they blew it. And now they're blaming us in the independent media because they're not able to steer you around. So Republic Broadcasting needs your help. The postal address to send a check, money order, or if you prefer anonymity cash, is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Road, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. The phone number where you can call in with a debit or credit card donation or pledge to be a recurring subscriber is 800-724-2719, extension 1 during normal business hours and extension 3 at all other times. So going back to the phones here, and we were talking with Layla, and believe it or not, over the commercial break, I got yet another email saying that you are definitely one of our better callers. So anyway.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you to your viewers. I appreciate that. I hope I'm not offending too many people because I've got views that are not of the norm. Having experienced a lot of the things that have been at a distance up until now to North America, but are now making themselves evident. Is resistance futile? Only if we give up on independent media. Unless we stand up and support. What's that old saying about if first they came for this person, then that person, then finally they came for me. I watched Alex Jones with fascination during the campaign. He went all out. He risked everything to back up Donald Trump. And now whether Donald Trump is actually being held hostage in the White House or his family is, we don't know. But he did radiate a degree of sincerity, and I pride myself on being able to see when somebody is telling a lie or actually intends to do what they say they're going to do. Now, what has happened in the intervening months or the year is hard to say, but I don't for one moment doubt that he is doing what he is. He's following orders.
Yes.
And there's a lot at stake for him. So unless people, and whether or not you like Alex Jones is really irrelevant. It really is the principle of defending those who have the right to free speech, so long as they're not, promoting incitement to violence or breaking the law. Once we stop being prevented from expressing our opinions and debating those ideas, then we're truly doomed when we give up on that. And unless we offer the support that is needed, the so-called corporate media has been taken over bit by bit by bit, and I watched it happen when I work in the industry. I saw things happening that were frightening me to the point where when I finally reached a job where I was beginning to make money, I just turned, I thought, I've lost myself. I'm losing myself. For what? For money? And that's one of the reasons why we have to support you, Mike, because you're one of the few. Actually, you're probably the only show that I listen to now, because all the others, a lot of them, are not nearly as well informed as you are. And so my appeal, we need someone that we can rally around when and if the crisis occurs soon. And you're the only person that I can think of. And I hope we'll know where to reach you if they drag you off the air, because I have a feeling you're not going to just submit. I don't think you're the
well, all I can say is, stay near to that fax machine.
I don't have a fax machine.
Oh, darn it. Well, no, what we're going through, and I've said this before, this is a repeat of what happened when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing and books became affordable to the middle class. Prior to that, books were these very labor-intensive, beautiful works of art that were purchased by the ultra-wealthy, primarily as a status symbol. See, I have books. I'm better than you. But with the advent of affordable books, the middle class began to educate itself, and it was a serious threat to the power of both the government and the church at the time. And they did everything they could to try and suppress it and stop it. and it got a little extreme out there. The first man to do an English translation of the Bible was literally burned at the stake with his Bible. And that's how fanatic rulers are about controlling what the people know and what they're thinking. But in the long run, of course, the education of the masses won out, and those institutions that could evolve and adapt to the new reality are still with us. Those institutions that could not went extinct. Anyway, Layla, I'm going to let you go here. We're going to talk to you, obviously, on Wednesday in hour number 3, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently, the arrival of the USS Carney in the Black Sea yesterday has drawn a sharp response from Russia. And basically, they're saying Moscow's response would not be off the cuff, but carefully planned and take place within the program of Russia's security control of the Black Sea. Now, Washington, D.C. is firing back, saying that Moscow can't claim to exclusive security control of the Black Sea, and has declared it to be international water that should be accessible to the warships of all nations. Well, there's a little problem with that, and it's called the Montreux Convention, which goes back decades and basically said that the only nations that are allowed to use the Black Sea on a continuing permanent basis are those nations that are on the shore. And other nations are strictly limited in what they can send into the Black Sea, and especially warships. They're allowed to go on in, but only for a short interval of time. But now Washington, D.C. wants to say, to heck with the Montreux Convention. We, the greatest nation on earth, have declared the Black Sea international waters, and we're going to send in our warships just anywhere we want to. All we need is an accident or a hothead, and things are really going to get ugly. All right, back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Sounds like an invention for a submersible drone nuclear tip mine. And they all would come up when the Russians are not around, and when the Russian ships come around, they would go back down under the ground, under the water. Feasible, huh?
Feasible.
Nuclear powered. Feasible. Yeah, I mean, they have that Poseidon weapon they created, and also the cruise missile, the nuclear powered cruise missile. So if they shrunk down that power source, then it's possible they can put it in a mine, and there is mines that are nuclear filled. So, it's something to think about. Yeah. Hey, Mike, I want to talk about Lockheed Martin. Yeah, what a wretched company. I mean, Mike, basically, remember what your mother used to say? It's the people you hang around with is what represents you. So if we're hanging out with all these terrorists, Saudi Arabia and all that, this is who we've been hanging around with, people. Like, this is what we are. And the British and the French and the Canadians, even though the Canadians they got a problem with the Saudis now, but they ain't got a problem arming the Saudis also. So this is what have we become. We are linked to these people, I mean, it's a joke, I mean, my God, that blowing up a school bus. The Saudis shouldn't even be over there. We shouldn't be over there. We shouldn't be anywhere but here. I don't understand what the problem is. Pack them up and go home. That's it.
The problem is right now that the survival of the U.S. economy right now basically is dependent on access to natural resources at bargain basement prices in other countries, like opium out of Afghanistan, and of course continuing to force the world to trade at least oil and other natural resources only for the U.S. dollar. That's why the U.S. is going to stay in Iraq, to make sure that Iraq goes on selling their oil only for the U.S. dollar. That's what this is really all about.
Which proves that we are just a welfare and a warfare state in its decline, because we learn no lessons of the Roman Empire and so forth and so on, which is sad. So basically we are speeding up the decline by all these, because we don't have the troops to keep, like you said, garrisons, like full garrisons. So they're got pockets of garrisons. That's why you've seen the Eric Prince, who is like the founder of Blackwater, which his sister works for Trump. I don't know if she's still working for Trump. But there was an article where he's going to be the new viceroy of Afghanistan. He wants to have his private army Is that the future? You know, where they would have these viceroy / Blackwater type groups keeping themselves in these other, in these different countries, kind of like ISIS. Would those be kind of like a viceroy in a way, right, Mike?
Well, it's interesting that somebody revived that word at a time where we're talking about neocolonialism, a very covert neocolonialism by the United States of America. They don't go into these other countries and hoist the American flag. They just go on in and take over and hope that nobody will notice. And so the term viceroy, I think that was perhaps a little reckless to use out there. But the use of mercenaries has a very, very long tradition. The British were hiring those Hessians to come and help fight against the colonials in the American Revolutionary War.
So this is how far back it goes, people. So, I mean, leopard doesn't change his spots. I'm like...
Yep. Afraid not.
Hey, Mike, you know what the Caspian Sea deal, they also said this is closed to anybody that's not part of the Caspian Sea deal. That includes NATO. So
yes.
that area is closed, period.
Yep.
I can't, and I don't think they're going to allow any ship in there at all that's not part of the, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Russia, and, what's the other country? I said Iran, right? Yeah, that was the countries, I think. Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, that's good they keep them out because then that'll be, with the Belt and the Road. There's a lot of stuff going on over there. Like I said, most Americans have no clue because they're too busy watching that girl who got pushed off of the 60-foot or whatever it was bridge. They're pushing that now.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Like, they had her on TV. I'm like, this is all they're interested in. It's like reality TV show crap again, But all right, Mike, have a good show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And in turning to our domestic political scene here, earlier today, Fox News was running the story about how a verdict is now anticipated in the Paul Manafort fraud trial. And they were acting like it was imminent, but apparently it is looking more and more like the jury is going to go home today without reaching that verdict. And I'm sure that's making Robert Mueller and his people very, very nervous, because if Manafort gets acquitted, it's a major blow to the credibility of what Mueller's been doing. And that's why there have been these very bizarre tactics employed in this case, where you had CNN and these other outfits literally tried to get the names and home addresses of the jury to make them afraid to go against the officially desired verdict. They even threatened the judge. And apparently he's now under protection by the United States Marshal Service. I mean, this is absolutely... It's fascist state tactics. It's brown shirts when they're out there threatening the judges. Okay, let's take a phone call from Steve Elkins. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, the antitrust laws that were to prevent monopolies being formed in the mainstream media, which evidently has gone aside of being enforced. Yes. And I guess we understand whether 5 or 6 corporations own the 90% of the mainstream media. And Fox coming out and saying it's our job to control what you think. I just wonder, is there anybody looking to change the law to bring back real news, if there's even a chance with these people? But I mean, it's out of control, and the fake news and the bias. And they are, to me, the mainstream media is the enemy of the people, because they are working to deceive us.
Yes.
I just want to know if there's anybody working on this at all to bring back antitrust laws.
Well, I would like to see it happen, but you have to understand that the members of Congress are afraid of the corporate media. They don't want to stand up to them out of fear that the corporate media will basically destroy them on the next election cycle. That's how much power this corporate media has. Now, you're right. When this country first started getting into media, newspapers and such, laws were passed to basically limit how much of the media could be owned by any one individual or company. And the goal there was to preserve a diversity of opinion. And there had already been some media consolidation going on, but it was being blocked in many cases up until Desert Storm. And the U.S. government went to the corporate media and they said, we're going to make you a deal here. Okay, you're going to embed your reporters with our military. You're going to report on Desert Storm the way we want it reported. And in exchange, we will rescind all those laws limiting your ability to gobble up your competitors. And that's exactly what happened.
Well, the last thing I want to say is that it would be a very gutsy move, but I think he would be well authorized to do so. But I would like to see President Donald Trump revoke the security clearance from Barack Obama and others, of course, Hillary Clinton, make sure she's not in the loop anymore. But he's been working very, very hard behind the scenes to circumvent this new administration and cause lots of problems and undermine the whole administration. I think there's a good reason right there to pull the security clearance from Barack Obama, send a stern message that those who try to interfere with this administration, bring it down, will pay the cost.
Well, you have to be very, very careful there because these people have to be caught in an actual illegal act. Trump is not going to be able to simply say, I want to bring you all down because you don't like me and I don't like you, because not liking somebody is protected under the First Amendment. But there is no question there's a lot of corruption out there. Trump just has to find it. And, you know, he may be waiting for Robert Mueller to finally throw up his hands and say, I can't find anything. But at some point, what Trump needs to do is start getting his own special counsels out there. And he may have to fire Sessions and Rosenstein to get that going. In fact, he probably ought to. Trump ought to just clean out all of those top layers at the FBI and the Department of Justice of all these people who very clearly are biased against him.
Right.
And he's
no, I agree.
He's got to put on those presidential brass knuckles, is what he's got to do.
Wasn't Barack Obama part of the whole phony Russian dossier? Wasn't he part of that whole thing with Hillary and global GPS? Wasn't he part of that whole thing? That
was Fusion GPS, and I don't recall that he was involved, but we don't know for a fact that he wasn't. We do know that the spying that was going on against the Trump campaign did go all the way up to Obama himself.
Well, there you go. You got your reason right there. There's your reason. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, like I said, Trump's got to put on those presidential brass knuckles. All right. We're going to switch over to Cameron in the United Kingdom. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I hope you're well. Michael, a couple of things, quick call today. First of all, I really and truly enjoy Layla from Vancouver's call. She's extremely knowledgeable.
Yes.
Except today, words are very strong. She said freedom of speech is absolute, has to be withheld, has to be performed, has to be upholded. If it's not against sort of promoting violence, which I completely agree with, and if it's not against the law. The freedom of speech is designed to actually make people have a voice against unfair laws.
Yes.
If it's not against the law, then it's approved speech, I think. But then again, far be it from me to want to criticize Layla. She's wonderful.
Yes.
And my second thing, Michael, it's not a rhetorical question. It's actually a question. What has Donald Trump done during this year and a half, year and 8 months in the office that actually helped people? I don't know. Seriously, I don't know. I mean, I'm in UK. And I really want to know. I mean, he talked about borders, but apparently that's got nowhere. He talked about healthcare, got nowhere. I mean, what has he actually done? That's
I'm afraid on a lot of the issues he campaigned on, it's token gestures at best. Yeah, they're looking at putting up the wall. Trump had a bunch of the ICE officials up to the White House to honor them today, but it's all for show. The GOP tax plan basically gave the tax breaks to the already rich people who don't need the tax breaks, and yeah, Trump just really isn't doing all that much for we the people. And clearly, we have reason to be disappointed in him. But that doesn't mean turning a blind eye to some of the unethical and immoral tactics being deployed against him.
I understand. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Have a wonderful show.
Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Art, who's off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. You mentioned a little while ago about, the fascist tactics.
Yes.
That they're pulling with regards to, the judge and everybody having to be protected, under armed guard at all time now. I've been arguing for years that we have been under a fascist dictatorship of one form or another for well over 100 years. And the perfect evidence I use is I tell people, just look at the monuments we display around us and then look on the house at the floor of the house. And what do you see back there on either side of the speaker's podium there? Predominantly displayed these two big, gigantic, humongous fasci. Well, really, do you think if we lived in a constitutional republic, we'd be flying fasci on the floor of the house? Are you serious? And then people look at me, well, and then I follow it up with, oh, and by the way, when you look at everything that's going on right now, you know how to expose a fascist, tyrannical dictatorship? Force that government to act like one. And I think we're beginning to, the people are beginning to see.
Yes.
Maybe it's very, very slowly, but I think the people are beginning to actually see what we've been talking about for 20, 25, and 30 years, and they're finally starting to say, wait a minute. Now the question is it too little too late, or do we still have time? With that, I'll back on out, and y'all have a great one.
All right, well, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. And just to sort of clarify about the fascia on the front of the House of Representatives, it's not necessarily fascistic, although that's where the name comes from. But in ancient Rome, it was a symbol of the government's power. And all it is, it's a bundle of sticks with an axe head sticking out of it. And it was usually on display when any politician was out there politicking. We got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, getting on back to Seth Rich, a couple of interesting developments where there's this one independent media outlet who says they've identified two highly placed officials who arrived at the hospital within minutes of Seth Rich himself. And they issued this challenge to say, you have so many weeks to reveal who you are, or we're going to blow the whistle on you. Well, they're kind of a little bit too late, because over at afmg.com, they have come on out saying that former DNC chairperson Donna Brazil and the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, arrived shortly after the EMTs had delivered Seth Rich for emergency treatment of 2 gunshot wounds to the torso. Apparently, he was still alive when he arrived at the hospital here. So, now, here's an article from Zero Hedge, and it's asking a relevant question. What if Russiagate is the new WMDs? And lately, that's become my standard response when somebody says, well, the news is saying this about Iran. And is that the same news that told you Saddam had nuclear weapons? That usually gives them a moment of pause here. But apparently, Rosie O'Donnell was at a protest in front of the White House last week saying the evidence against Trump and Russia is huge and mounting every day. Actually, there isn't. Okay, there isn't, but continue on out there. He's going down, and so will all of his administration. The charge is treason, and some of the protesters were holding up signs that spell treason. Now, apparently, Trump's guilt in Russiagate is now simply assumed by much of the American left. They're not interested in the fact that there's no evidence. They believe, we believe. They've turned into a religious cult. But this article points out, remember that same thing happened in the run-up to the war with Iraq, where all of the media figures and politicians, they believed Saddam had nuclear weapons. We don't need proof. And went on in and smashed up Iraq. No weapons of mass destruction were ever found. They tortured a lot of people, some of them to death, to find them. Didn't happen. And now the U.S. is stuck there. Because the real reason that Iraq got attacked is they wanted to sell their oil to the euro. And now the U.S. has smashed the place, and they're just going to stay there and make sure you sell your oil for the dollar, only for the dollar. Don't you dare use any other currency here. Now, former CIA Director John Brennan is still out there foaming at the mouth about his security clearance getting revoked, and says he's going to seek legal action. And when he was on Meet the Press, Brennan was saying, you know, Trump's egregious abuse of power and authority. Well, that is his authority to revoke a security clearance. But Brennan says he wants to go to court and get an injunction to stop Trump from pulling clearances from other people, which Brennan describes as critics. Not going to happen. The president does have the authority to terminate a security clearance. We'll be right back. And aloha America, welcome back to our show. And we were talking about how John Brennan is still out there screaming about his security clearance and his plan to try and go to court and get an injunction against the president to not revoke any more security clearances, which I don't think that's going to work. Now, they might find a sympathetic judge who might issue the injunction, but I'm sure Trump's lawyers would take it right up to the Supreme Court. And Brennan has made such a spectacle of himself, he's actually starting to lose support around him. Former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper was on State of the Union saying that John and his rhetoric have become an issue in and of itself, commenting that John is subtle like a freight train and he's going to say what's on his mind. Now, I think what the real issue here is that, yes, those people with permanent security clearances, it would be seen as a horrible insult to have them revoked. But I think the concern here is that if they're working for the deep state and they're trying to find some way to bring down Donald Trump, they're using their security clearances to get access to information that could be used against Trump. And I think Trump is well within his rights and his authority to put these security clearances on hold unless and until they come back into government service. Now, we've had a lot of callers into this program, and I went through this myself many years ago. Normally, when you get a security clearance, it is for the duration of the project you are working on, and when that project is over, you get your exit debrief, you turn in all your classified materials, and your security clearance is canceled. I told one of the callers a story about Oppenheimer, who was one of the designers of the atomic bomb. And after the bomb project was over, he lost his security clearance. He was not allowed to read papers he himself had written. That's how tight that it was. By the way, a little postscript on this story coming out of 12160.info. Apparently, Michael Hastings was working on a story about John Brennan at the time of his mysterious death, where his car just took off and slammed into a tree, or blew up, depending upon who you ask here. Okay, now, Chris Christie is now out accusing Trump's legal team of bad lawyering. And even worse, it was very upset that White House counsel Don McGahn is waiving executive privilege and cooperating with Mueller. Now, Trump basically fired back saying that McGahn had his permission to talk with Mueller, so that hopefully will defuse that issue. But again, if Trump does not have lawyers who are really working in his best interests, he's in trouble. Now, Judicial Watch has filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the Central Intelligence Agency for records of communications with former Senator Harry Reid and his staff regarding that bogus anti-Trump dossier funded by the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee. What they want to find is just how it got leaked to Senator Harry Reid. Now, we know that John McCain is in there. At one point, he said that he was a conduit getting that dossier on its way, as it were. The Judicial Watch wants to find out who leaked it to Harry Reid. Now, Bolton is out there screaming about election interference and the coming midterm elections in November, and he's saying it's not just Russia. Iran is meddling, and North Korea is meddling, and China is meddling, and they could swing the 2018 midterms here away from us Democrats who so richly deserve to take back Congress. Now, as we mentioned before, Manafort's jury appears to be heading to another day without rendering a verdict, and usually the longer a jury deliberates, the more they are leaning towards acquittal. And this, of course, is going to put Robert Mueller's office in a panic, because an acquittal would basically destroy what little remains of his credibility. So they've already got a plan B going, and they're going after Michael Cohen, President Trump's former lawyer. And he's apparently under investigation for bank and tax fraud. And investigators are looking at more than $20 million in loans to a taxi company he owns with his family. So what they're going to do is, if Manafort is acquitted, they're going to move Cohen to front and center. You won't hear about Manafort. They'll just say, oh, the jury came back and he was acquitted. Oh, we've got Michael Cohen. We're going to run him over the grill. Got to keep dragging this out until the November election so the Democrats can campaign on it. Over at Counterpunch, there was a very interesting article, and it's called Institutionalizing Intolerance. And we are seeing that in front of us, where civil discourse and political debate is evaporating. It's just going away. And everybody's out there screaming, I'm offended by this, I'm offended by that, I'm offended by other viewpoints, I don't want to hear them. And we're becoming a nation of people who just can't get along. Agreeing to disagree and being civil and polite about it is about as American as apple pie. But we don't have that anymore. We have bullying, we have threats, we have rioting. When you have an environment where you can't agree to disagree, then the bullies win and freedom suffers. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Turning to the economic news, Venezuela's key refineries in the U.S. may be at risk of seizure. Now, remember up at the top of the show when I was talking about Elizabeth Warren is pushing a bill for the U.S. government to nationalize the major corporations. And I made this comment about, well, you know, look how wonderful that worked in Venezuela, which is a joke because it really didn't. So back in 2007, Venezuela did this move where they basically nationalized assets in the country, many of them owned by U.S. companies like ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips. And Venezuela's state-owned oil company owns the Citgo refineries in the United States. And so now these refineries could be targeted as seizures for compensation for ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips losses. Okay. Maersk is sounding a trade war alarm, and Walmart is telling some suppliers to start looking outside China for product sourcing, which of course is going to be a boom for those other suppliers, those other countries. It's going to boost their manufacturing. What we really need to be doing is finding a way to incentivize the building of new manufacturing here in this country. And there have been a few successes. We've had a couple of steel mills reopen, and Ford is supposedly building a new auto factory up in Flint, Michigan. But that's hardly enough in a nation with 100 million unemployed Americans. So Walmart is still looking at foreign sources. They want those cheaply bought goods to lure people in with. And Americans are going to have to face a choice. are we going to going to the big box stores because we can get a discount on whatever it is that we're buying? Or are we going to have to just be more willing to do business with domestic American companies that do their manufacturing here? Now, I'm willing to do that. And I think we need to start some kind of movement where Americans are going to say, buy American. American made, American sold. Because without that, all of these tariffs and sanctions are going to fail miserably. That's where the Trump administration has really failed. They're not motivating the American people to come back to the American marketplace. Many years ago, when Claire and I were still doing radio advertising, we're talking, oh boy, I forget how long ago it was. There was a program here in Hawaii called Buy Hawaiian. We did a bunch of commercials for them as well. So anyway, that's the missing piece. If this is going to work, if these sanctions are going to work, then there needs to be some kind of a campaign to motivate Americans to being willing to spend a few pennies more to buy American-made goods. And that will kick off a manufacturing boom in this country. And that's really what we need. Now, Turkey and Qatar central banks have signed a currency swap agreement. They're now going to be sending their money directly to each other in their national currencies without going through the US dollar. And this was apparently done in response to Trump's doubling of steel and aluminum tariffs on Turkey, up to 50% and 20% respectively, which is hammering Turkey's economy. Now, Qatar is throwing Turkey a lifeline. So we'll see what happens there. Over in Iran, the French oil giant Total has pulled out of Iran and scrapped plans for a $1 billion project in the country as these new U.S. sanctions on Tehran continue to bite. Now, the headline says this is a huge blow to Tehran. It might not be, because a few weeks ago we reported where there is a Chinese company ready to step in and fill that void. So we'll see what's happening with that. Story out of Global Research. Gold is leaving the U.S. vaults. More and more countries are demanding the repatriation of their gold, currently housed inside the Federal Reserve System. Turkey was storing 220 tons. They want it back. And actually, they got it back on April 19th of this year. And other countries are starting to come on in and saying, yeah, we don't trust the Federal Reserve anymore. We don't trust the U.S. government anymore. We want our gold back. We want to have a gold backing, at least partially, on our currencies here. Turkey has also lodged a complaint with the World Trade Organization against the U.S. tariffs. And in its petition to the World Trade Organization, Turkey said that the U.S. violated free trade rules when it initially imposed tariffs of 25% on steel and 10% on aluminum imports in June for most countries. Doubling them is an additional violation. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Meanwhile, Iran is starting to look at ways they can sell their oil if Europe is coerced into supporting the U.S. sanctions. Now, most of the countries in Europe said, bad idea, we're going to get hurt by this, like we got hurt with the Russian sanctions. But the United States is saying, well, if you don't go along with our sanctions on Iran, we'll sanction you. We'll really put the screws to you. So Europe may knuckle under, and Iran is thinking where else they're going to go. I'm certain that China will be buying a lot of Iran's oil. I believe that Turkey said they were going to buy Iran's oil. It's just causing a huge amount of trouble all over the world, and I'm not seeing where any of this is working out for the betterment of the population of the United States of America or of Europe. Because when those tariffed products come into the country here, those higher prices are paid for by consumers. It's kind of a hidden tax, if you will, a hidden sales tax. Now, here's an article out of Russia Today, and they're talking about the U.S. overuse of sanctions. You're sanctioned, you're bombed, you're invaded, and the U.S. just seems to be in this mindset of inflicting punishment for states where it claims they're doing wrong things. But if you hold the U.S. to the same standards, we're no better than they are. When you look at all the accusations hurled against these other countries, the U.S. is guilty of most of them. So these other countries could start sanctioning the United States. Not that we have all that much to sell anymore. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. Our manufacturing has been in decline for 30 years. Even our weapons systems don't really work all that well. Okay, over at Zero Hedge, another view of the sanctions saying this could signal the final demise of the dollar hegemony. And yes, I agree. Because the response of the global economy to all these sanctions is going to be to redesign itself into a whole new system. And there'll be a big dark hole in the middle where the US dollar used to be. The problem with being an abusive country like the United States is the rest of the world starts learning how to get along without you. Because they don't need that kind of grief in their life. Too many of our policymakers in Washington are still laboring under the illusion that we're an indispensable nation to the rest of the world. And maybe we once were, but that's definitely going away. Okay. Now, we've talked before about how the government likes to cook the books on unemployment. And what they do is if you've been out of the workforce for over 6 months, you're recategorized. And that's why the US government can claim an unemployment rate of 4 or 5% at the time that the Bureau of Labor Statistics says that we have nearly 100 million Americans out of work for a very, very long time. And the government just came on out and announced that they also made major errors in the official economic stats from January 2011 to June 2018, meaning they got caught out. Somebody went on and looked at the books and said, these numbers don't make any sense. Oop, our bad, we made a mistake. We meant well, but yeah, it was an honest goof. It was an honest goof here. All right, now, turning over to the areas of refugees and immigrants, Judicial Watch is now suing the State Department for Obama-era records on refugee resettlement site locations. And they're trying to get that information because when that was all happening, the refugees were coming on in, they were being put on planes and flown out all over the country, but nobody would say where. The only time we ever heard about it was when the people living in these communities complained loud enough where the media had to pay attention. So Judicial Watch wants to get the names of these cities where these refugees were resettled. Now, Vladimir Putin has come up with a really good idea. He's telling Europe they need to help rebuild Syria. And if they rebuild Syria, then all of those Syrian refugees now in Europe will want to go home. And it's a good idea because in the long run, it's going to cost Europe a lot less to rebuild Syria than to care for those Syrian refugees pretty much for the rest of their lives. Now, there's another story that has come on out. This one is from Russia Today, basically saying that the United States is trying to stall on any rebuilding of Syria until there's a political transition, which is another fancy name for Assad must go. So the U.S. has basically bombed the place into rubble, and they're saying, we're not going to let you fix the place we bombed into rubble until you give us a leader that we like. So, okay. Now, the Soros Foundation will withdraw from Hungary by the end of August. So, Hungary 1, Soros 0. And they're probably going to relocate the Open Society Foundation offices probably to someplace like France. And we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. Let's take some phone calls, starting with Terry in California. Aloha, Terry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, it's pretty ominous that all those trucks going up to that base in Syria, and, it can't be permitted. Actually, it can be, maybe with the Russians, is we'll just wait, and maybe that Kibini electronic warfare system that got the Donald Cook in the Black Sea, maybe that's the smartest strategy for them to do. Once we get those airplanes in there, and if they want to use that base to attack Iran, just put those electronic warfare aircraft up there and jam everything, and you won't have to come up, with a head-to-head conflict with the United States. And if they really want to attack Iran, not the Navy is probably the only one that's going to do it, them and the Air Force, because we don't, like Peter said, we don't have the ground troops to go and invade Iran. And the only option here is destroy the country. Or they want to pacify Israel by attacking Iran. They won't be able to get all the targets because a lot of them are dispersed and are way underground.
Yep.
So the only thing they can do is just try to destroy the country, and if the Russians come in with that electronic warfare system that's superior to ours, that'd be very interesting to see what's going to happen there. What are your thoughts?
Well, I have absolutely no doubt that Russia will be providing some of that frontline electronic warfare equipment, which has proven very effective, not just against the USS Donald Cook, but there are a lot of people who think that the reason Donald Trump's 2 cruise missile attacks into Syria failed to really hit anything worthwhile is they were being redirected and jammed as well.
On these cruise missiles from the Navy, can those electronic warfare affect them, or are they pre-programmed before they leave and they don't get any signal from the outside? If they're pre-programmed in the beginning, they're just on their own.
Yes.
They're going to hit the target.
Well, yeah, if you've got an autonomous vehicle and it's not emitting any radiation, then it can't be detected. Obviously, for things that operate in the ocean, you want them quiet so that passive sonar doesn't pick them up. But again, Russia's come up with some really, really neat stuff.
Yeah, I know, and they probably have some stuff we don't even know about. And if they just try to destroy Iran, they're going to take the big thing that the American people got to fear, and it's starting right now, is massive inflation. We're going to wind up like Venezuela and, like you said, a Soviet Union style collapse, and we're defeated by the Israelis, not by the Russians and ourselves.
Yeah.
The whole thing's going to come down because of them. Because, I know we're in there for the banks, and but we're also in there for greater Israel. And I know if you go to Washington, the State Department, they know that the Middle East policy is called by the Israelis, the Zionists, and the Zionists in the U.S. government and the State Department. They direct the Middle East policy. And there's collusion between them, of course, and the bankers.
Yeah, it's all driven by money. All wars are ultimately economic in nature. Of course, that's not what ordinary people are being told. We're here to free the slaves. We're here to bring these people democracy. We're here to save them from an evil tyrant, the rest of it. But always behind it, it's access to resources or other economic agendas, like making sure that Iraq continues to sell their oil only for the US dollar, or access to opium from Afghanistan. And that's what war has always been. And every leader who starts a war has to lie their own population into it.
Well, it's also for the economic benefit of Israel, because they want to expand over to the Euphrates, of course, and they want those oil fields in the Golan, and they want to expand into Syria. They want those, and they're not going to give it up, and they've got tremendous influence, and they run our Middle Eastern policy.
Yep.
Okay, Mike, that's the only point I made. Appreciate it. I'm going to let you go, and you go on the next caller or the news, whatever.
All right. Thanks an awful. Whoops. Hang on a second. Trying to do something here. My my clock here is a little bit off, and I got to get that set so that things synchronize up. Okay, close enough for country and western. Alrighty, now let's thank you very much for the phone call here, and we're going to switch over. No, actually, we're coming up on a commercial break, so I'm going to leave this next caller until after the break, and during the break, I'm going to get this clock nonsense messed up, and then we're going to get back to talking to immigration, the refugee crisis, and a lot of science health issues we've got in the third hour. And okay, so we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we got all the little tech issues settled here, and we're going to go back to the phones here to Jesse in Houston. Aloha, Jesse. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I called you last Friday about the economy and stuff. I was telling you a story about me and my wife.
Yes.
I just wanted to to let the listeners know, and you know that I wasn't calling it to get any sympathy. I was calling to confirm what you say about the economy and how it's going down the drain. And what I really called about was 9/11. When I was in fourth grade is when it happened. I was in fourth grade, and I came home one day and. Excuse me, I get nervous talking over the phone.
Well, just take a couple of deep breaths and relax. I've been doing this now for like 12 years, and there are still some days when I get nervous.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, so I walked home. That's back whenever you could walk home, and people wouldn't call CPS and stuff like that on you. But I was walking home, and I go home, and I mean on every channel you could see the planes hitting the building. Every channel. It didn't matter what channel it was on, every channel you saw it. And I was watching when I was young, I remember everything. We were watching a video on demolition in our fourth grade class. Not at that specific time. We're talking about how they demolished buildings once they, wanted to get rid of them or whatever. And what they did was exactly how the firefighters and, regular people explained, the people that were going through the stuff at the time at 9/11, they explained, the hearing of the bombs, the firefighters finding, how they cut the steel in like a slant rather than straight across, like they were going to cut a tree off.
Yep.
So they found that, and I remember this specifically, the scientists were saying that they cut the metal in slant so that way it goes, so the building don't spread or tip over. It falls directly straight down.
Yes.
And that's exactly what the whole point of the video was, like how they demolished the buildings and how basically their job was to make it safe around the area where these buildings were coming down. You understand?
Oh yeah, I understand. Well, in my page about 9/11, I have that photo showing those slant cut beams, and there's also a huge amount of melted steel directly underneath the cut, which is basically indication that thermite was used.
Yeah, I'm just sometimes I sit and think, and I'm just baffled on how, because I'm younger generation. Like I told you before, I'm 26, and I talk about your radio show to as much people as I can. I'll bring it up, and they immediately dismiss me, and it's kind of worrying that they don't. It's either they're on drugs, then they're either on drugs, so they don't care, or they're making money, whether it be working at a restaurant or construction or whatever. They're too busy doing what they're doing to think of and just stop and think what the government's actually doing to it. Because I'm sitting here and I can see it all around with the taxes and I'm getting checks, and when Obama was president, and I'm not saying it's all Obama's fault, but when Obama was president, there was a lot more money getting taken out of my checks than there is now. But it was just getting bad. Almost $300 taken out of my check, and it's like, whoa. And this is another thing. You've been saying 18 years we've been at this wars.
Yes.
And it first started, didn't it start with Afghanistan?
Yes.
Didn't it go into Afghanistan first, and then out of nowhere it was Iraq, and then, and this is what I don't understand, how people don't stop and see what they're doing. Like, why did they need to go into Iraq after Afghanistan? The excuse is terrorism, but where's the evidence?
Well, what you're dealing with, and we've talked about this on the program before, is that we're all raised to think we are inherently good people, that if we saw an injustice, that we would have the courage to take a stand against it. There's all kinds of movies about, people who did that, like, Karen Silkwood. But the reality is that a lot of people don't want to know what's going on, because if they're confronted with the government engaging in this kind of behavior, then they're forced to make a choice. Are they going to try and do something about it at great personal risk and expense, or are they going to basically go along with it, at which point they have to surrender their self-image of being a good and just person? And most people don't want to do that. So they basically gratefully cling to every little piece of propaganda being put out by the government, so they can go on saying, I'm a good person, I'm a just person, and I would take a stand against injustice. I just don't see a reason to have to do it right now. That's what's going on here. It's a denial mechanism, and we saw it at work in Nazi Germany with the so-called good Germans, for which they wound up losing their country.
I hear you, Mike. One more thing before I let you go. The media thing with them letting Alex Jones off the platform. Donald Trump, like you say, Donald Trump really, 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 really has to know. He really has to know that it was because of you guys. It was really because of you guys.
Yep.
That me, Jesse, never had voted before. Never voted before, never even thought about it, because I've always thought the thing was just ridiculous. But because of this alternate media, because of the truth-speaking people, I voted for him. Yeah. Because of all this, I voted for him because I was like, whoa, he's really different, And so I'm like, wow, and it feels like he's not caring.
Yeah, that seems to be the way it's coming across. He's turned his back on us. Maybe there have been some recent developments we're going to get into a little bit later in the show.
All right, well, I'm going to let you go, Mike. Thank you for having me back on. See you later.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Jim in Chicago. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Earlier in the show, you had a caller from the UK, and he asked you, what has Donald Trump done for the American people?
Yes.
And basically you said Trump, he's basically, running his mouth and doing nothing. And I would have to agree. If anything, he's about to make the American public really suffer due to the terrorists and other things.
Well, and the fact that the economy is not actually in recovery, and we keep hearing all of these experts saying that there is a major correction on the way.
Right. And the thing that really disturbs me is, why do people still support this man? And like you always state, when is he going to put on his brass knuckles?
It's a very, very good question. But you need to remember that politics in this country has become very cult-like. And we certainly saw that on full display in 2016 with Hillary's followers. I mean, Hillary could have dropped kittens into a blender on live TV and they still would have loved her.
Well, yeah, you're right about that. But again, don't the American public know what's going to happen to them down the road?
I think a lot of them are in denial right now. I mean, they're concerned about what's going on right now, but most of them don't have the education to look into the future and see what's coming. And of course, corporate media is saying everything's going to be fine, the economy's in recovery, we're going to win all these wars, it's all going to be good, yada, 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 yada. And because of the deterioration of our educational system, most younger people don't have the skills necessary to figure out, first of all, that they're being lied to, and second of all, to verify for themselves these claims that are being made about, you know, what a good direction the country's going in. You know, but they're all true believers in human-caused global warming.
Wow. And my final point or question, what is John Bolton doing in Israel? Is he up to something?
Well, he's visiting several countries on this trip, and it's all about diplomacy, but he hit Israel first to basically reassert that, you know, America's on Israel's side in all things and that we're going to make stink face at Iran.
Well, it sounds like he might want to start a war himself.
Yeah, well, the problem is he wants to start a war that other people will actually have to fight in, and I have a real problem with that.
Right. Okay, Michael, you take care. Thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. We're going to get on back to the news here. Now, as you know, the church has been rocked by yet another massive sexual abuse scandal over in Pennsylvania. And the Pope is basically not saying much about it at all. But he's still out there screaming about Trump on this family separation down there at the border. And it turns out what's going on here is the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops received $176 million in federal contracts for refugee resettlement in 2015 and 2016 alone. So they're making money off of this thing. They're making money, and that's why the Pope is lecturing Trump about family separation and refusing to talk about the child molestation scandal here. Over in California, boy, is that place going downhill fast. They're about to pass a law allowing illegal aliens to sit on government boards and commissions. Talk about just giving the state away to non-citizens. Apparently, they think this is okay, that people who are not here legally now get to sit on government boards and commissions and make decisions affecting the lives of the legal American citizens. All right, over in Paris, there's this Parisian mayor who named a street in honor of the Palestinians who were forced out of their homes by the creation of the State of Israel. The mayor, Dominique Lespar, and his colleagues at Bezons Town Hall are now saying they've received threatening calls. You know, he's being threatened with death for basically mentioning Palestine. Like I said, real brown shirt stuff here. Populist Sweden Democrat leader Jimmy Åkesson is reinforcing his stance on wanting to see Sweden leave the EU, saying that no supranational body should have authority over the Swedish parliament. Now, we're coming up on the Swedish national election next month, and the Sweden Democrats leader slammed the EU, saying, for me, the EU is not the way for cooperation in Europe. So the populist nationalist pushback is definitely underway. Pardon me. Now, there's a former congressional candidate who campaigned on fighting for strict gun control, and she's now been charged with murder for shooting and killing her former campaign manager. after his body was found in her apartment. And we're getting a reconnect message on Twitch. Boy, the quality of our internet has really gone downhill. So, am I still on the air? Okay. So let's keep on going here. So this Kelly Collins, 30 years old, she campaigned in Georgia's 10th congressional district, campaigning on a platform of more gun control. And now she's been arrested and charged with murder. Obviously, gun control didn't work there. We mentioned this last week, but I'm going to mention it again because I think it's an important issue. Members of the Satanic Temple held a rally for the First Amendment at the Arkansas State Capitol building, where they unveiled an 8.5-foot tall bronze statue of Baphomet with 2 adoring children at his side. And the Satanic Temple is suing the federal government for the right to permanently install the statue on the Capitol grounds, arguing that since the Capitol has a 10 Commandments monument, other religions must be allowed to display their symbols there too. Now, of course, we know every winter season we see all the Hanukkah decorations all over the place. So they have a valid point. Okay, now, over in Great Britain, their High Court has basically refused to grant a resolution to non-gendered rights campaigner Christy Ellen King. And the High Court judge basically said there's going to be no X option available for passport applications. You're either one or the other. So gender-neutral passports are not going to exist in Great Britain. All right, let's take a phone call from Al in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I hope you're doing well. I hope all your viewers are having a good time listening to you.
Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. This YouTube thing that's been going on with you, since you've been on YouTube, I've noticed that a lot of times when something is going to be said, and they kind of know what's going to be said, we'll get that caching thing going on. On Saturday, I watched one of your older shows. It was maybe 2 or 3 days, and I should have wrote it down, and I didn't. But at a couple of points, what you were going to talk about was missing. And I went back thinking, okay, maybe it's just, a screw up. And no, it wasn't. I was wondering if you were aware of these things going on.
Yeah, I've been getting complaints from people, and I'm waiting for my Real Video account, my Real Video channel to be created. Apparently, they're hideously backlogged over there. And at that point, I'm going to basically change to Real Video, do my streaming over there, do my archiving over there, because, yeah, I get a lot of complaints about YouTube.
Isn't it? It's like, they think we're stupid? Mike, I would give up YouTube,
trying to make us
and I don't use it a lot. I would give up YouTube in a second, just to know that freedom of speech was being upheld.
Well, you're going to get that. I mean, Real Video is very busy. They've got something like 20,000 channels already, and it's really taking off. And I'm in communication with them, but I'm way down on the list. What can I tell you? Thank you for the call, Al. We're going to take a break here for commercials, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And apparently, there is this situation, again, California, over at Pomona College in Claremont, California. They're having these courses, for lack of a better word, on queering children and the Bible. And apparently one of these articles, or one of these courses rather, is titled Queering Childhood, which examines the figure of the child and how this figuration is used by politics, law, and medicine to justify continued cultural investment in reproductive heteronormativity and productive able-bodiedness. In other words, now it's the fact that we love children that is basically leading us to this world where we think there have to be men and women in it. That's really, really out there. And again, I wonder what kind of a job students who take these courses are going to find when they graduate with which to pay back those student loans here. Over at Yale University, there's been kind of a happy ending to a story that actually began 3 years ago. And basically, there was this professor, Nicholas Christakis, and his wife, Erica. And Erica wrote an email arguing that college students are old enough to choose their own Halloween costumes and to deal with costumes they might find offensive. And of course, this triggered all the liberals who are out there saying, no, no, you can't have a Halloween costume of this and it'll offend somebody, and you can't have a Halloween costume, you know. Halloween is supposed to be a scary time anyway. So there was this huge brouhaha where they literally chastised this Christakis for supporting his wife's free speech. So here we are today, and this same professor has been awarded the Sterling Professorship, which is Yale University's highest faculty honor. And Yale has already issued a statement saying it was based entirely on academics. But of course, the liberal whiners are out there saying, no, 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 this man believes in freedom of speech. We can't have that out there. Now, here's a very bizarre situation. This is about the Parkland shooting. And apparently, the judge in this county documents case decides the First Amendment doesn't cover public records. So Broward Circuit Judge Elizabeth Scherer said the newspaper, which had published some of these documents, flouted her order that portions of a school district report about Nicholas Cruz should remain shielded from the public. And in the future, she declared she will consider listing exactly what the newspaper can and cannot print. So they're basically acting like they've got something to hide. Okay. Now, another judge, this one over in Washington State, has sided with the NRA and the Second Amendment Foundation against a gun control ballot initiative in the state of Washington. Now, this initiative, I-1639, was being presented as a simple attempt to raise the legal age for long gun purchases from 18 to 21. Okay, we'll put this story on hold until after we come back from station identification. Aloha America, welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and we're talking about the story from Washington State where there was a ballot initiative that was put forward supposedly simply to raise the minimum age for a long gun purchase from 18 to 20 years, or actually to 21, which basically disqualifies 18 to 20-year-olds from exercising their Second Amendment. And again, where I grew up, when I grew up, you got your first gun at age 12 and a lecture on gun safety. We didn't have mass shootings where I grew up. Anyway, the reality is this bill, I-1639, would have put in a new system of background checks and other gun controls as well. For one thing, they wanted to create a gun registry for any transfers of commonly owned semi-automatic rifles. They introduced a 10 business day waiting period on the purchase of semi-automatic rifles. They've imposed criminal liability on otherwise law-abiding gun owners who fail to store their firearms to state standards. In other words, they're going to come in and say, this is how you have to store your firearms. Got to have a gun safe or at least a gun lock. I don't know what the plan here is. And I'm sure the people behind this initiative are already buying stock in the companies that make trigger locks and gun safes here. Basically, it's authorized a $25 fee to be assessed to semi-automatic rifle purchasers. It's basically just a way to try and make purchasing these rifles cost prohibitive. It also mandates training prior to purchase. Now, I got to be very honest, I don't have a problem with that one. I actually think it would be a good idea. I think anybody who wants to get into firearms, as a hobbyist, as a hunter, as a target shooter, I think it's very reasonable that they show competency before they get the gun. Just like you have to go through driver ed before you get a driver's license. And I know I'm going to get a lot of nasty emails from the Second Amendment people about this one. But I actually like that idea. Okay, over in Chicago, my goodness, they're having a lot of fun over there. 18 people were shot on Friday, 23 shot on Saturday, and 21 shot yesterday. That's 57 for a single weekend. Thank goodness they've got such strict gun control over there in Chicago. All right, let's turn to some issues of health and safety. Now, people are becoming very concerned about their drinking water. There are now a lot of places in this country where it's actually dangerous to drink the tap water as it comes out of the faucet. Places like Flint, Michigan, where the water mains have corroded and leached into the water. Areas of fracking, where there are fracking chemicals that are coming out of the water. And in states, including Colorado, Michigan, Pennsylvania, New York, and North Carolina, local water systems have been contaminated with toxic chemicals called PFAS, PFAS, which stands for perfluoroalkyl and perfluoroalkyl substances. And these are artificial chemicals manufactured in a lab. They do not break down in the environment. They last for thousands of years. These are forever chemicals, and they're starting to find, this is in the drinking water as well. More than 30 communities so far. Now, the various water departments around the country test for certain things they expect might be there. Bacterial contamination, lead, metals. They can't test for everything. And the water treatment systems aren't designed to deal with things like, you know, slowly accumulating medications or chemicals. Now, all of this, of course, is good news for the bottled water manufacturers until you realize that in most cases, that bottled water does not come out of that nice natural spring that you see on the front label. It's just ordinary city tap water. It's run through some additional filters and a little additional flavoring. But if there's something in that city water, it's going into that bottle. Okay, out again in California, there's been a case involving noted vaccine rights physician Dr. Bob Sears, and he's being threatened with a loss of license and 3 years of probation. This guy got charged and tried for giving a vaccine exemption to a child with a history of adverse reactions to vaccines. This is a result of Senate Bill 277, which basically took away a parent's right to refuse vaccines for their children for any reason whatsoever. The only remaining legal pathway for refusal is to get a medical exemption from a physician. And this doctor did that, and under the pretext that he did not thoroughly investigate the background of the child's medical history, they literally dragged him into court. By golly, you will not stand up to those vaccine makers. Those vaccine makers are our friends. They got oodles and oodles of money over there. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Over in China, it's a different story. They've had a major vaccine scandal over there, and more than 40 government officials, including 7 at the provincial level, are being held accountable for these substandard vaccines made at the Changsheng Biotech Company. And it looks like they're really in a lot of trouble. And Xi Jinping personally oversaw this case. He said there's going to be new systems set up to protect the production line. and make sure the vaccines are what they're supposed to be and don't contain other chemicals. And you'd think that would be a little bit of good news, but it's being ignored by the corporate media. And the reason for that is really very, very simple. A lot of pharmacies import Chinese medications, including vaccines. When you go on down to that pharmacy on Main Street in your town, and you walk on in there, a lot of those products are actually made in China. And there have been issues with Chinese medications being substandard or even containing things that should not be in there. There have been cases where Chinese medications don't actually have the labeled amount of the medicine in the tablets or caplets. China is trying to clean up its act because its vaccine industry has become one of their major industries. And China's unfortunately had a bad image over the years for its intellectual property violations, its problems with the vaccines. And it looks like Xi Jinping is trying to clean up their act. And basically, China's clearly in ascendancy. Even as the U.S. declines, China is continuing to climb despite all of Trump's punitive sanctions here. Story coming on out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain. Interesting that we don't see this reported here in the U.S., but apparently the current HPV vaccine does not protect against some of the most common forms of the virus. And scientists at the University of Sheffield found the majority of people who tested positive for HPV had strains not covered by the current vaccine. And the government has announced last month, teenage boys will get the human papilloma virus jab from next year. Somehow, I don't think those boys are going to get cervical cancer. Of course, everyone's so confused about being a boy or a girl. Who knows what could happen? Again, back out in California, California politicians are considering a law that would compel all of the state's public universities to dispense abortion pills to students. And they're basically turning the university student health centers into abortion centers, and they think it's progress. So I remember there was a time when even those who supported abortion said it should be rare. And now they're making it available as Tylenol. Now, this is the morning after pill, and I think a lot of people are comfortable with the idea that that soon after conception, that you're not dealing with a sentient, self-aware creature. But again, it's going to encourage sexual promiscuousness, which in turn is going to lead to more sexually transmitted diseases. Now, I understand how sexually active or motivated college kids can be. I remember in my college days. But I think they'd be better off, you know, pushing condoms rather than these morning after pills. So I can imagine taking one of those morning after pills would have to be a traumatic event for the woman, because basically it forces your uterus to spit out everything in there that the pill doesn't like. Getting on back to opioid, apparently opioid overdoses killed a record 72,000 Americans last year, according to the CDC. It's a major, major problem. But the pharmaceutical industry's got to do something with all of that opium coming in from Afghanistan. So let's talk about suspensions and social media, and I'm seeing articles where it's saying social media could actually be in trouble because of this. Because people don't want to think that they're interacting on a platform that is going to basically treat them like a child. Now, the other day, of course, Facebook suspended Telesur, their English channel, And Facebook really couldn't seem to come up with a good reason why they did it. Telesur got the usual boilerplate message from Facebook, you violated our terms of use, but without being specific. Now, is it possible that some government asked Facebook to delete the page and Facebook went along? We certainly know that other social media has openly said, yeah, when China says take down a page, we take it down. Over at InfoWars, their program, Real News with David Knight, has now been shut down on YouTube. And a second social media giant is now blocking Republican Elizabeth Heng's ad. They are targeting conservatives here. So basically, Elizabeth Heng was raised in Fresno. She's got a good work ethic. She worked at her parents' Asian grocery store as a child. She went to public school, was class valedictorian. Sounds like a really good person. She's running for Congress in California's 16th Congressional District. Now, she has a campaign video out there basically talking about the events her parents went through in Cambodia. And her parents succeeded in escaping the communist regime in Cambodia to resettle in California. And it is an amazing video. And basically, Twitter has now banned that, saying it's shocking and too controversial. Well, there's nothing controversial about what Pol Pot did in Cambodia. It's well-documented history. And I think social media has definitely gone over the edge on this thing. And a lot of people are starting to push back. Amazingly enough, Bill Maher, who's as liberal as they come, used a portion of his show to defend Alex Jones' right to freedom of speech. Now, the Trump administration has started to do something here. It's not what you might expect, but basically, Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson is accusing Facebook of engaging in housing discrimination. This is according to a complaint filed on Friday. In it, HUD says the social media giant allows landlords and home sellers access to advertising tools that limit which prospective buyers or tenants can view certain online ads based on race, religion, sex, disability, and other characteristics. All of this a clear violation of the Fair Housing Act. So Facebook is in legal trouble for that. It may just be the opening salvo. Trump is finally coming on out and making comments about social media's abuse of conservative voices and the independent media. Apparently there's been another banning of somebody. There was a former employee of Tesla who took to his Twitter account and basically began posting photos that he claims back up the assertions Tesla has denied. And he's telling other employees, followers, to basically upload photos of what he claimed to be improperly handled cooling tubes, proof of damaged battery cells being reworked and installed in cars that were sold, and apparently a high volume of scrap waste. And Twitter promptly suspended it, because Twitter is saying that you can't talk about another person without that person's permission. So according to Twitter, you need permission to be a whistleblower from the party you are blowing the whistle on. That makes a lot of sense out there here. Article, this one coming out of Waking Times, talking about the internet kill switch. And this is something that's sort of been in the folk legend going back for almost 20 years, where supposedly the president has a button he can push that would shut down the entire internet. And of course, shutting down the entire internet would be an economic disaster because of how many businesses are now dependent on it. So the new task is to find ways to filter content the government and corporate media and corporations in general don't like, while not touching that part of the internet that is making all kinds of money here. So there is no actual button if there ever was. But there's certainly all of this banning going on. And Fahrenheit 451 has now become Fahrenheit 404. Story out of Investment Watch blog. Government spying and censorship is the start of widespread book burning. Everyone is guilty of something. Anyone can be silenced. And this article is very much right. What we're seeing going on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube is the modern equivalent of book burning that which we were told was bad when the Nazis were doing it. How dare the Nazis silence dissent? And today, liberals are cheering it. Oh yes, we've just got to shut everything down here. We've got to ban those conservatives here. If we actually have a fair and open debate on the issues, we're going to lose those midterms. So silence those conservative platforms and conservative voices and start rounding up all those illegal immigrants to get them to vote. Another story here from the Daily Mail, and it's reporting that Twitter has started banning a huge number of accounts, and a lot of people are taking to the site to bemoan the loss of hundreds of followers in a single day. So now there's a new hashtag out there in the Twitterverse, hashtag Twitter Purge. And again, that's exactly what it is. It's a purge. It's the hand of tyranny just emerging from the darkness. And that's why I keep saying Republic Broadcasting does need your help. What really happened needs your help. We're going to fight this one out all the way. We may see lawsuits on this go all the way to the United States Supreme Court on this one. And I want to know, where is Donald Trump on all of this? All right, we're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And one of the areas people need to be aware of is how words are used to try and control us. And right now, there are 3 trigger terms that are designed to stop critical thinking. Now, the first one is an oldie but a goodie. The CIA came up with it all the way back after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Conspiracy theorists. And it's rather overused. And if you really think about it, it's simply somebody who's trying to understand what's going on and is willing to look at uncomfortable facts. Now, conspiracy is a real thing. There's even a law against it. But conspiracy theorist has been seen as dismissive, a way of getting rid of people with embarrassing questions without having to actually answer them. Now, the second one is the label alt. And it's being used as an adjective for sentiments that supposedly do not fit with the accepted status quo, ideas outside of the box. It actually may go all the way back to the early days of the Unix operating system, in the days before web browsers and everything, to a system called Usenet, which was a community news posting site where you could put up articles and you could read other people's articles, and there were Usenet servers all over the place. And there was a separate section for content that parents might find objectionable for their children, and it was called the alt hierarchy. And you'd have these news groups like alt, duct tape, furry things, whatever. And that may be the origin of the use of alt, because it had a negative connotation. Oh, you're over in the alt hierarchy. What are you doing over there? So, and of course, this new one, which is hate speech. This has become a favorite of politicians and news commentators, because what could be more dangerous than hate? But there's a problem with that. Hate speech is not the same thing as a hate crime. Speech is just that, speech. And the idea of trying to criminalize hate speech it becomes an issue when you realize that the government gets to decide what is hate speech. And anybody who's out there trying to tell the truth in a government of liars can be accused of hate speech and demonized. Another article, this one out of Richie Allen, on how political correctness is totalitarianism on steroids and will be the death of free speech if we let it. And he's trying to get on out there and sound the alarm that political correctness really is an attempt to trick people into self-censoring. I have a concern about this candidate. Oh, don't say that. You'll offend them. Everybody's just triggered by possible offense. In fact, story that just got put up here, Frontier Airlines suspended a pilot in connection with a social media comment on a transgender student. So political correctness has literally reworked our society where people are genuinely afraid to say what's on their mind. And it is insidious because people think that's what they're supposed to do. And you're not. That's why we have a First Amendment, so you can get on out there, peacefully assemble, discuss what's going on, and petition the government for redress of grievances. And everybody's got a different opinion. And you cannot have free speech and an offense-free environment at the same time. It's impossible. No matter what you say, there's going to be somebody on earth who is offended by it. Usually it's going to be the liberals because part of their self-image is being offended at everything. I'm offended at that. Those shoes don't go with that shirt. I'm offended by that. We have to have the courage to speak out, say what's on our mind. And if somebody comes up and says, I'm offended by that, say, okay, be offended. It's like that Australian comedian. Nothing happens to you when you're offended. Just say, be offended. I don't care. That's part of political correctness, that we're supposed to be obsessed with other people's feelings at the expense of our own freedoms. I'm not going along with that one. I try and be gentle and diplomatic and polite, but I'm going to speak what's on my mind. And if you're offended by something I've said, too bad. Because I refuse to surrender my freedom of speech. I refuse to give up that First Amendment. Because if we lose that First Amendment, if they succeed in taking away our freedom of speech, we are in serious, serious, serious trouble as a nation. And we seem to be heading into that right now, where between the deplatforming of those of us who are willing to speak our mind, coupled with this cultural Marxism called political correctness, the American people don't realize they're being swindled out of one of the most basic rights that they have. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha America, welcome back to our show here. And Facebook is in trouble in another way, and this is potentially a lot more serious than violating the Fair Housing Act. Apparently, Facebook has been fudging their numbers to their advertisers. And there was a lawsuit filed last Wednesday basically saying that Facebook deliberately misled advertisers on its platform by claiming it had a far larger audience size in U.S. cities and states than it really does. So they got caught on that. And by the way, it's not the first time it's happened. All of these social media corporations have been accused of rigging the numbers and overstating their reach in order to drive their advertising prices up. But now Facebook is getting sued for that, and I think that would be a really good thing. Okay, now, do you remember the Prenda Law piracy scheme? Prenda basically made about $3 million from the scheme. And the way it worked is the lawyers for this law firm would upload copyrighted porn onto public websites, wait for it to be downloaded, and then sue the people who downloaded it for copyright infringement. And it was a scam, and they got caught doing it. And Paul Hainsmere has pled guilty to charges of wire fraud and money laundering for his part in the Prenda piracy scheme. And his guilty plea is part of an agreement that will ensure he does not receive a prison sentence longer than 150 months. Well, a lot can happen in 150 months. I think that possibly all those people who got wrongfully sued ought to be suing Prenda. Now, here's an interesting story. It basically involves a teenage hacker who was able to break into Apple's secured servers. And basically, Apple contacted the FBI. The FBI then passed the case to the Australian Federal Police Force, where they later tracked down this teenager and found software that had enabled the hacking. It's funny the way they phrase that. It makes it sound like he didn't write it, he just bought it off the dark web. But the AFP raided the teen's family home in Melbourne and seized 2 laptops, a mobile phone, and a hard drive. And court documents said the teenage hacker stored 90 gigabytes of Apple-secured files and customer accounts in a folder titled Hacky Hacky Hack. Now, how did they find this nefarious criminal? Was it the work of the FBI or the AFP or even Apple? No, this kid was bragging about what he was doing on WhatsApp, and somebody just spotted it there. Now, if you're using your computer or even just your smartphone on a regular basis here, you already know we're living in a season of just uncontrolled scams and fraud all over the place here. And apparently there's one that was out a few years ago. It's making the rounds again. And what it is you look at a website and all of a sudden there's this authoritative, insistent male voice saying, you know, you've got to log in immediately, your computer's compromised, we're going to fix it. And it just keeps repeating over and over and over again. And part of the warning is if you disconnect this, you will be disconnected from the internet as a threat to our servers. And it is a scam. And the way that you spot it's a scam, and this is a good rule of thumb, look at the email address that whatever you're being asked to fill out is being sent to. And if it doesn't say the appropriate party, the bank or Microsoft or whatever, you're dealing with a scam. And we see dozens and dozens of these every week. Now, last week, early in the week, the FBI warned of a possible worldwide mass hacking plot that could have millions drawn from bank accounts. Well, apparently the hack did happen. And one wonders how it is the FBI knew it was going to happen, but didn't have enough information to stop it. But apparently the hackers managed to steal $13 million from ATMs across 28 countries. The cyber criminals infected cash machines of India-based Cosmos Bank with malware, which allowed them to approve transactions and access client accounts. Fake credit cards were then used to drain the cash from the machines. So this is a highly choreographed fraud scheme known as ATM jackpotting. And again, how is it the FBI knew this was going to happen, but not enough information to stop it here? Over at Apple, they have removed thousands of apps in compliance with the Chinese government. And apparently most of these apps involve online gambling, which is something that China does not wish to see become a problem in their country. And a lot of people are starting to say that there is an issue here where governments in one country are issuing directives to these large multinational corporations that are effectively changing the behavior of computers in other parts of the world. They're affecting all of us. Now, I'm not a big fan of online gambling. I don't allow that on my website. But it is an issue. And how do you enforce the gambling laws in some states? Here in the United States, gambling is illegal in pretty much every state except Nevada and New Jersey. I mean, California allows poker clubs, where you go and play poker against each other. You know, gambling addiction is a really nasty thing, and I got to see it up close and personal when I worked as an entertainer in Las Vegas. And that entire town is basically a giant Skinner box that uses what's called intermittent reinforcement, meaning a cash payout, to keep people coming back and just pumping that money into the machines. Okay. Now, here's a little bit of good news. Michigan has just passed a bill that bans the National Security Agency's intrusive data collection practices. It prohibits law enforcement and state agencies from turning over personal data to the federal government without due process. They're calling it the Fourth Amendment Rights Protection Act, and it's basically going to go into effect next month after it passed the Michigan State Legislature with overwhelming support and only one no vote. And the bill states its purpose is to prohibit this state and certain other governmental agents, employees, and entities in the state from assisting a federal agency in obtaining certain forms of data without a warrant, and to prohibit certain uses of certain data collected without a warrant. Now, enforcement's probably going to be a problem because the NSA is already tied into the phone and computer systems, but at least Michigan is trying to make a stand on principle in an age where the federal government has become openly disdainful of the Bill of Rights. Okay, apparently over in Italy, they're getting a little bit nervous. There have been a lot of quakes around the Mount Vesuvius area, including one that hit 5.2, which struck in the central region of Molise. And people are concerned that Vesuvius could erupt again. It's not extinct. It's dormant, but it's not extinct. Another little interesting story. This is about apparently there has been a series of thefts of invaluable Chinese art going all the way back to the Ming Dynasty is basically being looted from galleries all across Europe. And suspicions are beginning to arise that this is private Chinese billionaires are paying for this. Remember the X-37B, that little robotic mini space shuttle the military has? It's been in space pretty much for a year now, and nobody knows what it's doing up there. But it obviously has got a really wonderful power supply. We don't know if it deploys solar panels from inside its cargo bay or if it's running on a nuclear reactor. I would tend to think, given that this is a military project, it's probably the latter one. But that's up there, and it's doing whatever it is that it does. All right, so let's talk some local news here. Down on the Big Island, the volcano Kilauea appears to have slowed down. They're still calling it a pause. They're hoping it's going to last. The USGS has lowered the alert and warnings for both the summit and fissure rate from warning to simply watch. And that's a really good sign. Now, over at Volcanoes National Park, they're saying it's going to be a while until they can reopen the park. Now, that's bad news for Volcano Village, which really depends on tourism dollars to survive, and they've taken a major, major crushing hit during this eruption. But the people who run the park are saying they're not going to reopen it until they know that everything is perfectly safe. Now, Volcanoes National Park basically covers that Kilauea summit and Halemaumau and a couple of other small things. But you can still tour the other volcanoes down what's called Chain of Craters roads. And, of course, I don't know what condition it's in after this last eruption. But they want to be they want to be safe. They want to know it's safe before they let people back in there. Now, last week I mentioned we had a hurricane in our neighborhood yet again, Hurricane Lane. And it looked like it was going to miss us to the south by an even wider margin. than the previous hurricane. But now they're saying this storm is going to take a northwest turn. And as of right now, both Kauai and Oahu are now in what they call the cone of uncertainty, which is the possibility of error on either side of the predicted track. Now, my estimation is it's probably actually going to sail between Kauai and Oahu, but we'll still get a lot of wind and rain from that. All right, let's take a phone call now from Daniel in British Columbia. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, aloha, Michael. I don't want to bore you with Canadian stuff, but you were talking about words being used as weapons these days. There's a politician here in Canada who's getting in hot water for a couple of tweets that he did. Mm-hmm. He was talking about this statue of John A. Macdonald being removed from the front of the legislature in Victoria, British Columbia.
Yes.
And John A. Macdonald is he's like the Canadian version of George Washington. He didn't cut down any cherry trees or anything like that, but
well, neither did George. That was just campaign propaganda.
Probably, but he did. He made a point that John A. Macdonald, in the time of when he was around, was basically taking orders from the British Crown because Canada wasn't quite a country yet. And a lot of the segregation and schools for the Aboriginals, sure, it's an issue and it's a dark history, but instead of removing the statue, they could just put the plaque or rename the plaque or change the wording on it to include his dark side too, instead of all the good things like helping found Canada. So this Maxime Bernier, his name is Maxime, not Maxine, he's a conservative, and he's also saying, at the same time they're pulling down a statue of John A. Macdonald, they're renaming a park in another part of Canada after the founder of Pakistan. And he said the founding of Pakistan led to 1 million deaths. And so, of course, all the liberals just jumped on him. I mean, politicians are citizens too. They've got, they've got the right to speak their mind, and sure, they represent their party and so forth. But it's just becoming out of control. And he said this is another example of extreme liberal multiculturalism.
Yeah.
And there's also a thing today, our version of the NFL here in Canada, it's called the CFL, the Canadian Football League, but they have their opening games, and it's called Diversity is Our Strength Day, and everyone's wearing these T-shirts saying diversity is our strength. They're just force-feeding this stuff on us.
Uh-huh.
So I thought I'd weigh in on that.
Well, yeah, we're being force-fed this stuff. Soros is not ready to give up, even though he's been kicked out of Hungary now. And they're still pushing for this one world government, one world private central bank model.
Yeah, I think the Justin Trudeau is really in trouble. I think a lot of Canadians have just had we were too far to the right before when we had, what's his face there? I can't remember his name. But this guy he's off the rails. He's, worse than Hillary Clinton would be. Just everything he does is, he's just kind of a butt kisser to, nobody in Canada agrees with anything he says now. Mm-hmm. So they're going to try and call an election early, they think, because the Conservatives haven't picked a real leader yet. So they think maybe they can sort of force their way in and call a snap election, which is something we have here in our country. Mm-hmm. So anyways, I'll let you get on with the show.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the phone call. And you're right. Sometimes liberalism just seems to have gone nuts here, and they are pushing this multicultural agenda. At the same time, they're trying to tear down our existing history and replace it with something new, multiculturalism. And of course, liberals are always going to be upset no matter what you do. And frankly, my advice is don't try and make a liberal happy. You're just going to annoy them. You're just going to annoy them. Okay, NASA is hopeful that the rover Opportunity is going to wake up in the near future. The Martian dust storm is pretty much all over, and the big issue is how much electricity is left in the rover's batteries, how much dust is there on the solar panels, and they're still hoping that they're going to be able to get that ship back. So we wish them a lot of luck on that one as well, because I've sat in those consoles and I know what it feels like. And Opportunity and Spirit have done great work. They lasted a lot longer than they were supposed to. Anyway, we're going to take a break for commercial. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today on this Monday here. And over the weekend, the Ring of Fire really seems to have gotten very active. Now, the USGS is out there saying, no, this is just, random occurrence. But the Ring of Fire had 53 major earthquakes in a 24-hour period, including this monster 8.2 that hit out near Fiji. So, all kinds of things going on out there. Nature's showing who is the boss here. Over in Genoa, they've finally completed searching for all the bodies in the wreckage of that collapsed bridge, and the death count stands at 43. And now they have to basically clean it up. And meanwhile, of course, there are repercussions going back and forth about how the bridge was not being maintained, how even before it collapsed, it looked like it was dilapidated and in bad condition. Some are saying it should have been renovated years ago. Others are saying the renovation was too much. It should have been condemned and taken down. But nothing was done while the politicians argued back and forth. And now there has been this catastrophe. It's going to cost them a lot more money to clean up that mess, all that damage down in the rail yard, than it would have been to, bolster the bridge. Now, bridges do have finite lifespans. They're designed to last a certain number of years, and they can be designed to last a very, very long time, but they must have proper upkeep. And I'll give you a good example would be the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Most people don't know this, but there's a crew always working on that bridge that starts at one end of the bridge, and they knock out every single rivet and put a brand new one in. And they just keep doing that over and over and over until they get to the other end of the bridge. Then they come back and they start all over again. So no corroded, aging rivets in the bridge. And by the way, they'll sell those older rivets in various shops around San Francisco. Makes a great souvenir here, or at least they used to. France is concerned that they have 840 bridges at a risk of collapse. Apparently somebody did an audit, and Emmanuel Macron is being condemned by his government after this report that came on out after the Genoa collapse, saying that 7% of France's structures, 840 bridges in all, are also at risk of collapse. And there are some bridges here in the United States that people are expressing concern about. But nobody can come up with the money to fix them because governing is choosing, governing is prioritizing, and it's more important for us to buy bombs and bullets and destroy other people's countries so that we'll be great even with collapsed bridges. Kevin Spacey's Billionaires Boys Club opened. They took in a grand total of $126 at the box office opening night. That's $126, not thousands, not millions, $126. So apparently Kevin Spacey's naughty past has caught up with him. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do the Jim Goddard show. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Please take what you learn here and share it with everybody that you know, especially this issue about social media deplatforming conservative voices, because it's an attack on our very democracy. All right, so we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.